I want to start out today by just saying a special welcome to everybody who's online joining us. Glad that you guys are with us today. So several years ago, I'd say 1 or 2 years ago, I started doing this thing with my boys. They call it flipping them like a pancake, and where I take them and throw them up in the air and flip them. Although someone did come up to me last night and say, you know, when you flip a pancake, you only do it 180 degrees, not 360 degrees, but don't get caught up in that. But we call it flipping like a pancake. In fact, this is a little video of me flipping my son, Caleb. This is what it looks like.
Yeah. No, stop. You gotta spin.
Now, you can tell he's a massive boy. He's only 4. He weighs, I think he weighs like 57 pounds, maybe 58 pounds. He's a big boy. But obviously, like when he's doing this, for him, he has so much joy. For him, he's all, I would describe it as him having all faith. In other words, he doesn't really understand what would happen if I drop him, right? Like I don't know, the ground might hurt more than him. I'm not sure which one, but he doesn't quite understand this idea of what would happen if I actually dropped him. And for him, when I'm doing this, literally, it's like again. And at one point, I'm finally like, dude, I can't do it again. Like, you're too big. Like, and I mean, a year ago, it was a little bit easier, but nowadays it gets a little bit harder. But they'll come up to me and say, Dad, will you flip me like a pancake? I mean, like over and over and over again. When I first started this with Caleb, he's the one who wanted me to do this to him. Kason, my older son, he's 5. He would look on and he would see the joy that his brother had. And he would come up to me and say, Dad, do it to me. And so I'd say, okay. And so I'd grab him and I would get ready to flip him. And he'd go, well, no, don't do it, right? Like for him, he had this realization of not like kind of a fear inside of what would happen if my dad doesn't catch me. Now, Caleb is all faith. He has no clue what's really going on. He's just like, just flip me. Like let's just have some fun with it. But my other son, Kason, he has this thing inside of him, like this fear, right? Like, which is kind of normal for a kid. I mean, this fear of what would happen if I fall. And I don't know if you realize this or not, but our society actually lives with a lot of fear. For a lot of people, they're afraid of things like losing their job. Like, what would happen if I don't keep my job or job security? Or what would happen if I don't become recognized, or I'm not good enough at what it is I'm trying to do? Or we have fear that things aren't going to work out in our lives. We lose sleep over relationships not working out. A failure of relationship. High school students, middle school students, maybe it's a failure of not being good enough in athletics, or not being good enough in the classroom, or somebody not liking you at school. And for a lot of us, I think we live our lives with fear. And yet God's word tells us that actually as a follower of Christ, we shouldn't be fearful. In fact, this is what it says in the book of 2 Timothy. It says, for God has not given us a spirit of what? Of fear. That the fear that we face inside, the things that we go through in life, I'm not downplaying those things. We'll talk about some of those today. But actually, those things don't actually come from God. Now, that sounds good. It's easy to preach, but it's actually a little bit more difficult to live out. In other words, I can stand up here all day and say, hey, guys, God has not given you a spirit of fear, that you should choose to have faith in the midst of whatever it is you're going through today. And it's really easy to say that until you're in the midst of something that produces fear in your life, right? So for me, my wife and I, we just purchased a different home, and we're going to be moving. And so we have not closed on that house yet. But in the process of us finding this house, we listed our house to put it up on the market. Now, I've heard the stories about how the market, like how fast it's going these days, right? And I've heard stories of people like, yeah, I put my house up and like 2 hours later, my house sold. Or 4 hours later, my house sold. Or 2 days, 4 days. I mean, like all these like quick sales of houses. And I'm like, well, sweet. So I'm going to put my house up, and I'm thinking like 30 minutes later, it's going to sell, right? And so about a week ago, a little bit over a week ago, I put my house up for sale. We listed it, and 4 hours went by, and it didn't sell. And I know it seems crazy, but I started having this overwhelming sense of fear. Literally, I was like, what's wrong with the house? Like, Joel, it's been 4 hours. I know, but what's wrong with it? And then like 4 days went by and it hadn't sold. And I was like, something's really wrong, right? And I know it's easy to say we should have faith, but sometimes when you're in the midst of something that seems like it's a big deal to you, it's easier said than done. Now, I know some of you men maybe here today, excuse me, And you would say, I don't have fear. Like, I'm a man, right? But you know this is true. See, men, we do a really good job of this, of like hiding it. Like we lose sleep at night and we won't maybe talk about it. But for some of you, you're in over your head at work and you have this overwhelming sense of fear that you're not going to be good enough at your job. Or maybe for some of you, you're walking through life and you realize you're in charge of the finances in your home and you realize how much debt that you have. And you can't sleep at night because of it. You have fear because of it. And the rest of your family might not know about it, but you understand, the circumstances and how scary it is for you that at any moment, if you lose your job or your wife loses their job or your husband loses their job, that all of a sudden you're going to lose everything. Maybe for some of you, your marriage is falling apart, or maybe for some of you, you have this sense because you're a stay-at-home mom, or maybe you're a stay-at-home dad, and you have this idea that your kids are driving you crazy, you can't keep up with the house, you feel like, you're living really for nothing, or maybe for some of you, I know people go through this where you have this overwhelming sense of guilt and fear because you're not home enough with your kids. And so you're working and you're trying to make a living for your family, but yet you feel like you're not adding up enough at home. Any of you ever feel like, or have a fear that you're not a good enough parent? Raise your hand if you've ever felt that before. Yeah, like all of us, right? I mean, so I was on Facebook this past week, and one of my friends, she posted this post that made me feel like a much better parent, and I thought I would share it with you because we all can struggle with this, right? And her daughter's name is Abby, and she wrote, "Oh, Abby, Abby, I stared at her for a good 15 seconds today after she got out of the pool from swimming lessons." So imagine swimming lessons, like lots of kids in the pool, trying to figure out why there was brown water with pink flecks in it running down her legs. It turns out that she had the runniest of poo filled with crayons that she had eaten 2 days ago, thus the pink flecks in her swim diaper, and leaking out significantly. And then they got everyone out of the pool, right? I mean, so you can hear stories like that and realize, sometimes in life you go through things and you go, man, am I failing? Or you feel like you're not doing good enough, or you feel like you're not adding up enough. We all have fear in our lives. In fact, I think it's somewhat the way that our society tells us it's normal to live. But God, He tells us to be different. So we're in this series called Stranger Things, and we're talking about how to live our lives right side up in an upside down world. In other words, if you missed any of this series, I would encourage you to go back to week 1 as Jeff kind of introduced this idea, our lead pastor introduced this idea of what it means to live right side up in an upside down world. But really, the idea behind this series is pretty simple, that what seems like right side up to the world, what seems like a normal way to live to the world, what if that was actually upside down? That as a follower of Jesus, we're actually called to be different. To live a different life, different from the way that the world tells you to live or what the culture tells you to live. And one of those ways that I want to talk about today is this idea of having faith versus fear. Of how, as a follower of Jesus, we are called to have faith over fear. Now, our world, I think, would tell you that fear is a normal thing. But God, I think He tells us that we should choose to have faith, to not have fear, but have the faith in Him. Now, somebody who understood this whole idea of this concept of not only living different or having faith was a guy by the name of Peter. In fact, over the next few weeks as I'm going to be speaking, I'm going to walk you through some of his teachings because Peter understood living right side up in an upside down world. Now, I would just say this, those of you who complain about our world these days, for some of you, you're so fed up. In fact, this morning I was driving in and I was thinking to myself, man, we live in a society that is so divided right now. It's crazy. Like nobody will listen to anybody. It's amazing. And yet, as bad as that might seem, I want you to understand, it is nothing compared to what Peter was going through. Now, some of you might know this, but Peter actually wrote a couple books in the Bible. Those books were named after him, 1 Peter and 2 Peter. And the one that I want to look at today is 1 Peter. And it was written between the years 60 and 65 AD. And it was during a reign of a very corrupt man by the name of Nero. Now, if you don't know much about Nero, I want to paint a little bit of a picture of what Peter was writing to these people about and what they were facing as far as the struggles that they were having and as far as them choosing faith over fear and what was going on in their life. Nero was known as a very just bad man, really. He killed his mom. He killed his first wife. Most likely, he probably killed his second wife. And many believe that he actually burned the city of Rome. In 64 AD, what we know is that a fire broke out for about 6 days, and it destroyed the entire city of Rome. And many people believe that Nero actually wanted to rebuild the city, and because the Senate wouldn't allow him to rebuild the city, he actually set it on fire himself. Well, this didn't go over well. You can imagine people looking at your leader going, "You just burned down our whole city. What is wrong with you?" And so he began to blame it on these people called Christ ones, or Christians, Jesus followers. And so this already persecuted group was persecuted even more. And during this time when this was written, just to give you an idea of how bad Nero was, this guy would take dead animal skins, he would place them on Christians, he would set them in a cage with wild dogs, he would sip some wine and eat some food as he watched as these dogs would maul these Christians to death. That's what he would do. He would actually take Christians, he would dip them in hot wax, he would tie them to a tree, and he would light them on fire like a candle and burn them and kill them and murder them. This is the context in which Peter writes the book, 1 Peter. So who is this message to? I would say it's to really two groups of people. One, maybe those who are facing fear today, right? And so their fear in their time was this fear of not like, am I going to keep my job? It was a fear of life. Am I going to live? Am I going to make it through the next day? Is Nero going to find me? Am I going to be persecuted for my very own faith? But maybe for some of you these days, you're facing a trial of some kind. It could be a financial trial. It could be a loss of a job. It could be a health issue. It could be a friend issue, a relationship. It could be emotional. It could be an addiction. And so this book was written to people who are going through something that leads them to having fear in their life. The second group of people I'd say it's written to is those who one day will go through a trial in their life. And I think all of us could say that would be everybody. And so Peter writes this book, and I think he speaks to us as well. And this is how he starts it when he's writing to these people who are being persecuted. He says, this letter is from Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ. He says, I'm writing to God's chosen people who are living as foreigners. And everybody say the word foreigners. He's saying that I'm writing to everybody as foreigners, or that could be translated to exiles or aliens. He's saying, in other words, this isn't your home. He's saying to the people who are being persecuted, I want you to understand something, that actually I want you to keep this in mind, that if you are a follower of Jesus, you have to remember that this is not all that there is these days, that there's more. In fact, you're just passing through. And that even though this time might seem difficult, even though this time might seem overwhelming to you, you're actually just a foreigner, and therefore this isn't your actual home. In other words, this might seem like right side up, but actually it could be upside down, that you're called to be different in the way that you live your life as followers of Jesus. Well, what does this mean to be different? What does this mean to live right side up in an upside down world? Well, I think it means that you have different values. I think it means that you have different morals. I think it means that you have a different belief system than everybody else around you. You're different in how you handle yourself in the midst of trials or in the midst of something difficult in your life. And let me just say again, it's so much easier to say, it's so much easier to preach than to actually live out. It's easy until something difficult comes in your life to live a different life. See, you should say, and you would think, well, of course, I'm called as a follower of Jesus to treat people differently, right? I'm called to treat my enemies as if I love them. I'm called to treat people with respect, and it's easy to say that kind of stuff until somebody does something to wound you, right? Until your enemy steps on your toes. So a couple weeks ago, I got an email from a guy. It was probably one of the nastiest emails I've ever received in my entire life, like pretty nasty email. And not only was he attacking me as a person, but then he took it, what I would describe as a step further. He began to attack my faith and who I was as a believer. And for me, I'm like, okay, you can attack me, you can say I'm bad at this thing or that thing, but you start attacking who I am as far as a follower of Jesus, like it bothers me, man. It gets on my nerves. And so as I'm reading this email, I'm going through it, and I'm just like, wow, this guy's just got it wrong, and just I'm beginning to get emotional about it. I begin to get frustrated about what he's saying, and I had kind of in my mind about 10 or 12 just one-liners I wanted to send to him, right? Like I wanted to hit reply, and I wanted to, say a lot of different really true things, but really mean things to this guy. I mean, and I felt like I had every right to do it. And then that day, actually, as I was reading this and I kind of put it off to the side and thinking about, okay, how am I going to respond or what am I going to say? I was reading my Bible, which, by the way, I just would encourage you, if you don't If you're a follower of Jesus, you should, because it's our guide. It's what speaks to us. And I'm actually reading through the Gospels this summer. And that particular day, I was reading Matthew chapter 5. And this is, true story, this is the verse I came across. It says this: if you are kind only to your friends, how are you different from anyone else? Get this, even pagans do that. So this is what I'm reading as I'm getting this nasty email. And I was like, God, shut up. Okay, so Joel, if you are kind only to your friends, you're no different. Joel, it's easy to be kind to people who treat you with respect. But guess what? Pagans do that. Joel, it's easy to be kind to people who treat you the way you want to be treated, but guess what? Even pagans do that. So, Joel, if you can only be kind to people who send you nice emails, then guess what? You're no different than every other person. See, you're living as a foreigner. You are called to be different. So just for the record, I didn't email the guy back at all, okay? But here's what it means. It means that you're going to be different as a mom. It means you're going to be different as a dad. It means you're going to be different as a husband. You're going to be different as a wife. You're going to be different in the way that you raise your kids. You're going to be different in the way that you act at school, young people. You're going to be different in how you deal with those who wound you. You're going to be different in how people, and when people mistreat you, how you respond to them. It's going to be different in the way that you spend your time. You're going to be different in how you treat people. Why? Because he's saying that this is not actually your home. Get this, parents. You're going to be different in how you act at athletic events. Just let that sink in for a moment. Some of you call yourself a Christian until your kid is on the basketball court. And then you are no different. Think about that. I was reminded of this about 3 or 4 weeks ago. I coach TK girls varsity soccer team. And we were playing in the district championship game, which is a pretty big deal to win a district title. And so my team was in the finals, and man, I mean, they were playing awesome. We had a great game, and just to kind of give you a little backstory before this, leading up to this game, there was a girl on my team who had started the entire season for me. It was a great player, great kid, starting the entire season for me. And the day before this game, me and the coaches decided that we were pretty sure we weren't going to start this girl. We were going to start somebody else in her spot, because of certain matchup situations. So it wasn't something we didn't dislike the girl. It wasn't anything to do with that. But we were going to start somebody different. And so I went to the girl the day before the game and I said, hey, I want to just talk to you about something. I said, tomorrow in our district championship game, biggest game of the year, I don't know if you're going to start. And so she looked at me, I could tell like it maybe got to her a little bit, right? But she's like, okay, coach, yep, not a problem. Sounds good. Whatever you decide, I'm good with. I said, okay, thanks. So she goes on her way, and so that game, before the game, showing the girls' starting lineup, and I didn't start her. She's not in the starting lineup. Started all season long. Now, let me just pause right there. If that was some of your daughters, you would lose it. You would be so irate. My daughter has started all season. My son has started all season. My son earned that spot. My daughter earned that spot. You'd be irate. So before the game, I go up to the girl, and I say, hey, I said, how you doing? You good? She goes, Coach, I'm good. Let's play. Let's go. I'm good. I'm like, okay, cool. So game goes on, and we win the district championship game 1-0. Great game. I mean, just a battle. We win. I mean, girls are excited, pumped up. I mean, awesome. Everything's great, right? And at the end of the game, we're celebrating. We got the trophy. We're down by the net taking pictures. And the dad of the girl that I didn't start comes walking up to me. And as he's walking up to me, I'm like, oh, gosh, don't make eye contact. He's going to kill you. He's a big guy, too, really big, right? I should have thought of that before I didn't start her. And he walks up to me, and as he comes up to me, he sticks out his hand. I'm like, okay, is this like, you going to like squeeze my hand and take me to the ground? Like, what's going to happen? And I shake his hand. He said, Coach, I want to tell you something. I'm like, okay, here it is. He goes, awesome season. Great job. I'm so proud of the girls and how hard they worked. Oh my gosh, this is awesome, isn't it? And I'm like, yeah. And I said, hey, I just want to say something to you, because I'm like, I felt like I had to defend myself because he's going to come at me in a second. I said, I just want to tell you, I'm so proud of your daughter. I said, I know she started all season. And right in that moment, he says, Coach, stop. Coach, stop. I said, what? He goes, it's not about my daughter. It's about the team. He said, if this was best for the team, He says, and this is what we should do. He goes, it's not about, she doesn't care about starting. It has nothing to do with starting. It's about the team. And I thought to myself, and this is a guy, I know he's a Christian. I know he serves God. He goes to church on a regular basis. I know he's passionate about his faith. And I thought to myself, would I act that way? Would I be that different in that situation? It's called being different. As a follower of Jesus, I want you to hear this. In everything that you do, you are called to be different. What seems like right side up, what if it was actually upside down? And maybe God is calling us, hear me, to be different, which means in the midst of trials, in the midst of something that is difficult in your life, that we choose to have faith over fear. Now, Peter is going to show us in a moment that if you're in the middle of a trial, that you can actually choose to have a different kind of faith. And so today what I want to do is I want to look at what it looks like to have a different kind of faith over fear. Because here's what I know, that some of you these days, you're filled with fear in your life. You're faced with a trial in your life. You're faced with something difficult in your life. And most of us would say that the fear that we face, it's normal. It's normal. It's okay to be fearful because that's like a normal thing that you should have. But I want you to look at Peter's words that he says in 1 Peter chapter 1. He says, so be truly glad. Now again, let me just pause for a moment and just say this. He's speaking to people whose cousin just got murdered the night before. He's speaking to people that are being hung by a tree, dipped in wax. And he says this, that you can be truly glad. He says that there is a wonderful joy ahead. Even though you must endure trials for a little while. He says these trials will show that your faith is, everybody say this word with me, genuine. He says that these trials will actually show that your faith is genuine. And it is being tested as fire tests and purifies gold. He says, though your faith is far more precious than mere gold. So when your faith remains strong through many trials, it will bring you much praise and glory and honor on the day when Jesus Christ is revealed to the whole world. It's almost shocking when you think about it. What are they facing? He says that in the midst of all these different things that you're facing, even though, yes, you're being persecuted, even though you are actually being murdered, it's not about losing a job. It's not about a boyfriend or girlfriend breaking up with you. And again, I'm not downplaying those things, but think about what these people are going through. And he says this, you should be glad. Why? Because actually in the midst of this trial, you know what it's doing? It's strengthening your faith, and it's showing whether or not you have genuine faith. And even though you face a trial now, you can be glad. In other words, God might not make this temporary trial go away, but you know that there's wonderful joy ahead. And he tells us that these trials produce something amazing. Genuine faith. Now think about this. If trials produce genuine faith, then what would the opposite be? I would describe it, or the words I would use for it, it's not like a Bible word, but I would call it maybe false faith. In other words, people who claim to have faith in God or believe in God, but yet at the end of the day, they really don't. And I want to show you today, just for a moment, if you're taking notes, you can write these down. It's found in your handout. But I want to show you 3 types of false faith. In other words, people who would claim to have faith in God, they believe in God, but yet at the end of the day, they really don't have genuine faith as they go through trials. The first one would be this. Many of us can relate to this. It would be inherited faith. So one of the false faiths, I believe, is inherited faith. And some of you might actually have this faith, and it goes something like this. My mom and dad were Christians, so I'm a Christian. Some of you young people, can I just speak to you for a second? You might have inherited faith. In other words, you call yourself a Christian because your mom and dad make you come to church. And I would describe that as not genuine faith. Maybe it's false faith. In fact, I would say that this was me for years and years in my life. I went to church every single week. And I'm thankful, by the way, parents, I don't think it's a bad thing to have your kids come to church. I think it's a great thing to have them come to church. I'm thankful that my parents brought me to church every single week. I'm thankful that I was a part of a foundation in my life. I'm not against that. But what I believed, in other words, I was like, well, I'm not Buddhist. I'm not Muslim. I must be Christian because my parents are Christian. Because they go to church. So therefore, I go to church and I'm a part of this faith, right? Or for some of you, maybe it was your grandma had a faith or your friend had a certain faith. And so therefore, that's what I am. But the reality is it's not your faith. And like I said, that was me for years in my life. The second type of what I would describe as false faith would be shallow faith. Shallow faith. Now, I want you to hang with me for a moment because this is where I probably will offend some of you. And that's okay. Jesus talks about this type of faith in a parable in the book of Matthew chapter 13. You can read about it. But he talks about how a farmer goes out to sow seeds or to plant seeds. Now, whenever Jesus is talking in a parable, he's not talking about a literal farmer, going out to plant seeds. He's talking about something bigger than that. And he says that some of these seeds took root and some of them produced crops, but some of them, he says, just little bitty plants came up. In other words, the roots did not grow very deep in these plants. He describes this as shallow faith. And so Jesus says that all of a sudden, the worries of this life come along, the deceitfulness of wealth come along, the love of things of the world come along, and it says it chokes out the plant. They die. Why? Because the roots weren't deep enough. And can I just be honest? Maybe that's where some of us are at these days. In fact, let me just say something that might upset you. I believe this with all my heart. 6 months from now, there's some of you who are here today, some of you who are listening to this online, some of you listening to the podcast. You are excited to be here, don't get me wrong. You are thrilled to be here. You want to be here. It is a choice that you made to be here. You're happy to be here. But in 6 months, you will no longer be attending this church. You will no longer be attending any church. We see this over and over and over again. Why? Because shallow faith. There's people who are sitting at our Middleville campus today, people sitting at our Delton campus today, who unfortunately in 6 months will no longer, and I'm not talking about they go to another church, because if you go to church, that's awesome, whether it's this church or another church, but they'll just choose to altogether walk away from the faith. Why? Because he says that sometimes we have these things called a shallow faith, and maybe I'm stepping on some toes today, but that's okay. I've come to do that today, and honestly, if you're mad at me, it's okay, because 6 months from now, you're not going to be here, so it's all right, okay? It's good. Joking. So let me explain it to you this way. You know, sometimes because of my job, people tend to confess things to me. Like I'll be in a conversation with somebody and I don't even really know them, and I'll tell them what I do for a living, and they'll kind of start spewing like everything that they've done wrong or their sin or all these different things. And I'm all for the Catholic Church, but I'm not a priest, okay? I'm like, look, I mean, sometimes it's overwhelming at times when people are they want me to fix their problem. About, I would say 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was driving through a drive-thru, and I was getting some food, and I went up to the window, and the girl who was there taking my money, she looked at me and she said, "Oh my gosh, Joel." And this is a girl I knew because she used to come to Fusion 412, which is a student ministry here, when I was the youth pastor. And she said, "Joel, I saw your sermon the other day, or I listened to your sermon," or something like that. I said, "Really?" I said, "Awesome." And I go, "Well, which campus do you go to?" And she said, "No, I actually don't go to church anymore." She said, "But I saw a video online of your sermon." And I said, "Oh, cool." And she was telling me how she saw this video of me dumping ping pong balls into this jar and filling it up with water. Some of you might remember that and everything. She goes, "It was so good. It was so great." And she begins to tell me about all the bad things that are happening in her life. How she's struggling with, just a list of things. And I'm in the drive-thru going, okay, there's 6 cars behind me, literally 2, 3, 4 minutes have passed. She's spewing all this stuff to me. And not that I didn't want to listen, but I'm going, okay, these people are going to be really mad behind me. They want their food, and she's telling me all these things. But she began to tell me how rough her life was, how she needs God and how she desperately needs to get back into church. And I was telling her, yeah, you do. And I challenged her, actually. I said, "Why don't you come this next weekend? Be a part of it." She's like, "Well, I just don't know if I can. I don't know if I have time." And I began to tell her, you need to get plugged in. You need to be a part of the local church. And some of you need to hear the same thing today. You need to be plugged in, not just showing up to church. Because oftentimes what happens in our lives is if all we do is just show up to church, and I'm glad that you're here today. I'm glad I'm not speaking to nobody. But oftentimes what happens if we just show up to church, our faith becomes shallow. Our faith is not deep. Our roots don't grow. And that's why life groups are important. That's why joining a life group and being a part of a group of people who can hold you accountable. This summer, as we're reading through the Gospels, my life group is holding me accountable, making sure every single day I'm reading a chapter a day. And I'm telling you, I love it. Because I get these text messages from these guys who drive me crazy, "Hey, don't forget to read chapter 19 today. Don't forget to read." And I'm like, "Who are you guys? I'm the pastor. Stop bothering me," right? But we need it in our life. We need to be reading God's word. And here be community. It's valuable. Some of you online right now, let me just say to you, you've been online for too long. You need community. You need real community. You need to show up to a campus. You need to be part of something bigger than sitting at home. And I'm not dissing the online community. I'm just saying you need something more. And those of you who are here today, let me encourage you. Take a step in your faith. Ask yourself and challenge yourself, do I have shallow faith? Or when troubles of the world come, do I have deep faith? Because 6 months from now, you might go through something. You might face a fear in your life where your faith will be challenged, and you need to have deep roots in order to hold on. And that comes from community in our lives. So the three types of faith, false faith would be inherited faith, shallow faith. Finally, I'd just say conditional faith. Now, conditional faith would be this. It'd be faith, people who say that they believe or love God until things don't go the way that they want them to go. In other words, I would say I believe in God, or I have faith in God until all of a sudden something doesn't happen or work out the way that we want it to work out, and then all of a sudden we blame God. And maybe this could be some of you these days. Or you know people who are like this. People who maybe loved God until something bad happened in their life. And I don't want to get too personal, but I personally know people just like this, who had what I would describe as false faith, but I actually thought they had real faith until something bad happened in their life. And they've completely walked away from God. And I'm not downplaying a loss. I'm not downplaying something difficult in their life. But folks, that's conditional faith. Thinking that in this life it's going to be really easy. And folks, can I just tell us, that's not what God promised us. God never promised us an easy life. And I think some of you are here today, and maybe God brought you here to challenge you to stop having conditional faith, or maybe stop having shallow faith and make it genuine. So how do you have genuine faith? How do you have, as Peter said to these people, I want you to have genuine faith as you go through these trials, so that when these trials happen, you can consider it like joyful. You can actually rejoice in the midst of it. How do we use these moments that bring us fear to deepen our faith? How can God use these trials? And I would say this, how does he use them? First off, I would say that trials reveal your faith. That when you're going through a trial, it's actually going to begin to reveal the type of faith that you have. Look again what Peter says in 1 Peter. He says that these trials will show that your faith is what? Say the word. Genuine. In other words, when you go through a trial, it's going to show you, do I have false faith or do I actually have genuine faith in the midst of it? And he says, as you go through these things, that trials will begin to reveal what type of faith that you have. I would say it this way, that a faith that is being tested is a faith that can be trusted. In fact, that was Peter. You think about Peter in his life, he was tested. In fact, he even failed many, many times. But yet he was strengthened, he regrouped, and he was redeemed. In fact, this book, 1 Peter, 25 years prior to the writing of it, he's having a conversation with Jesus in the book of Luke, and it says this. He says, Simon, Simon. Now, before Peter's name was Peter, his name was actually, some people call him Simon Peter, so it's not like this is somebody different, but he's saying, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift each of you like wheat. But he says, but I pleaded in prayer for you, Simon, that your faith should not fail. So when you have repented and turned to me again, he says, strengthen your brothers. In other words, he says that Satan wants to test you, to see what you're made of. And listen to me at all of our campuses, everybody listening online, I want you to understand something. Don't think for a moment that the devil is not scheming to take you away from the things of God. Don't think for a moment that he's not using the fear that is in your life, the things that are happening in your life, the trials that take place in your life, the fear to move you away from God. And Jesus says to Peter, what are you made of, Peter? What are you made of? Do you have false faith, or do you have true, genuine faith in your life? See, trials will reveal your faith. And when you turn back, in other words, get this, you aren't always going to get it right. You're going to at times fall on your face. At times you're going to mess up. He says, but when you turn back, he says, I want you to strengthen your brothers. Now, how did God use Peter in the midst of this? Now, if you know the story of Peter, if you read much about him, in the early years, Peter, I would describe him as obnoxious, rash, very, kind of out there. And in later years, what you find about Peter is that he was bold and full of faith. And what happened is that God used trials to begin to strengthen him. Many of you know this, but at one point, Peter was talking to Jesus. And he says to Jesus, he kind of in his bold way, he says, Jesus, I want to tell you something. I will never deny you. John, he probably will. Judas, he's definitely going to. But me, I'm not going to deny you. I will, Jesus, there's no way that I would ever deny you. And what happens? Peter denies him not once, not twice, but 3 times. Peter denies knowing who Jesus Messiah is as he's being crucified because he was afraid of being persecuted himself. In fact, the last person that he denies Jesus to was a little girl. Think about that. He's so afraid of being persecuted that a little girl with a Snoopy lunch pail, he can't even say, I really love Jesus to, right? Think about that for a moment. His faith is being tested so much in this moment. He has so much fear of losing his life that he denies Jesus. 3 times, Jesus dies on a cross, he's raised from the dead. And then in John chapter 21, he has an encounter where Jesus asks Peter if he loves him truly. Think about this, you just denied him 3 times, and Jesus shows back up after he's raised from the dead, has a conversation with Peter, and says, if you really love me, he says, then feed my sheep. And so what happens, Peter goes off and he speaks to a crowd at Pentecost. 3,000 people are saved. See, he went through a trial. He went through something difficult. He did something dumb. But yet later, God strengthened his faith and used it. He faced trials. And when you're going through a trial, you can be strengthened in the midst of your faith. And that's why James said it this way. He says this. He says, dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, he says, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, he says, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. He says this, he says, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. See, when you're in the midst of a trial, he says that you can consider it joyful. Why? Because he says your faith is actually growing. And that faith growing actually produces perseverance in your life. In other words, God is using it. See, some of you these days, you feel like your faith is falling, your faith is failing. You're hurting right now because of something that you're going through, and I'm not downplaying the fear that you have or the thing that you're walking through in life, but I hope that you'll understand that there is purpose in the midst of the pain that you're facing these days. That God can still use the thing that you're going through these days, that it's not a waste, that God can use it. In fact, I believe that trials will begin to reveal your faith. The second thing I would say is this, is that not only do trials reveal your faith, but trials will draw you closer to God. Trials will draw you closer to God. I want you to watch this. Your trials actually, when you're going through something, is going to draw you near to God. This is how 1 Peter said it. He said it this way. He says, you love him even though you've never seen him. And though you do not see him now, he says, you trust him. And you rejoice with a glorious, inexpressible joy. And the reward for trusting him will be the salvation of your souls. I want you to hear me on this, church. I want you to remember who he's writing to. I want you to remember the group of people that he is speaking to. These are people who are being truly persecuted for their faith. These are people who are being murdered for their faith. These are people who are not just being murdered, but they are being murdered by being mauled, by being dipped in wax and tied to a tree and lit on fire. And he says in the midst of all of that, I want you to rejoice. I want you to rejoice with a joy that can only truly come from heaven. A joy that truly cannot be described. That even though that you're hurting and even though it seems tough, that you have this joy. And the reward, he says, is the salvation of your souls. See, that is the good news, right? See, here's where we as followers of Jesus get so confused in our faith. The good news is not that God will save you from your trials. The good news is that God will not deliver you from every single trial that you're faced today. The good news is that God saves you from your sin. That's the good news. The good news is not that God saves you from your trials. The good news is that God saves you from your sin. God never said that he's going to deliver you from all of your troubles. He never said that in your life you'll never have a migraine headache. He never said in your life that you'll never face financial trouble. He never said in your life that you'll never have this kid that you can't stand and doesn't seem to listen to you. He never said that you won't have troubles and trials in this life. He never said that you won't get sick with cancer. He never said that you won't have family issues. He never said that you won't have a financial problem. He never said that you won't get into trouble at school or have difficulty at school. He never said that you won't get bullied at school. God never said any of that. In fact, Jesus said the opposite. He said this, that in this world you will have what? You're going to have trouble. But take heart. I've overcome the world. Some of you today, you're not a follower of Jesus. Let me just tell you something about being a follower of Jesus. Before you decide to step across the line, it doesn't mean it's all roses. Jesus says this, that in this world, guess what? If you follow me, you're going to have trouble. Things are going to happen that you don't like. Fear is going to sprout up in your life, but you can choose to have faith. Why? Because he says, I've already overcome the world. See, the good news is not that God saves us from our trials. The good news is that God saves us from our sins. See, some of you would say something like this. Well, God won't give me more than I can handle, right? Can I just say that isn't true? In fact, that's a misinterpretation of a verse that says that God won't allow you to be tempted beyond what you can actually bear. In fact, I am utterly convinced, I am so convinced that God will allow you to have more than what you can handle. Why? So that in the midst of what you're dealing with, when you can't handle it anymore, when you're on your knees, when you're face down saying, I can't deal with this anymore, that in that moment you can choose to say, the only way that I can get through this is having faith in Jesus Christ. That's what he does in your life. Jesus doesn't say that life is going to be easy. Jesus doesn't say that life is going to be a bunch of roses. And I know that next week, half of you aren't coming back because of that. And I'm okay with that because I believe that in the midst of your trials, that if we have faith over fear, that God can deliver you from those things. That God will allow you to get to a place in your life where you are so low, but all you can do is look up to him and say, I got nothing else, man. I got to rely on you. See, faith is not what you see. Faith is understanding and believing in who God is. And yet at the same time, I know some of you are here today and you go, man, I hurt though. I'm dealing with this thing in my life. We have human fears, but God says, Peter says, I want you to have faith over fear. Some of you have this mountain, as I would describe it, in front of you that produces fear. Some of you have this thing that is in front of you that say, I can't quite get over this thing. In fact, Jesus addresses this with his disciples when he says this. He replied, because you have so little faith. And truly I tell you that if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Because nothing is impossible for you. Because God is bigger than your mountain. What is your mountain? Is it sickness? Is it relationship? Maybe it's job, school. Maybe it's an emotional thing. Maybe it's peer pressure. Here's what I believe. I believe that if you have faith, I believe that he will move that mountain.